How many of you has ever felt like God was taking too long? Maybe you prayed for something specific. Maybe you felt like God nudged you towards something, a new direction, a change, a step out of faith, and you said yes. You were excited. You were ready. But then, silence. Nothing. Waiting. Days turns into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And somewhere in that waiting, the excitement turned into frustration. The anticipation turned into anxiety. And you start thinking, maybe I misheard him. Maybe I need to take matters into my own hands. Maybe I should just do something, anything, because this waiting is unbearable. Can I tell you something? You're not alone. In fact, you're in really good company. Because the story we're going to look at today, as we continue talking about the Israelites, we're going to cover chapters 31 and 32 today, is about that group of people who experience that same thing. I have an outline in the back if anybody wants it when it's over during the service. It's back there on the table back there. They had seen God's power. They had walked through the Red Sea on dry land. It wasn't even muddy. It was dry land. They had eaten bread that fell from heaven, food that fell from heaven. They had heard God's voice in the thunder in Mount Sinai. But when Moses went up to that mountain to meet God, the days stretched on, and he went past the clouds and couldn't see what was happening. They panicked. And what they did next didn't just affect them. It pulled an entire nation away from God's presence. Here's what I want you to remember today and what we're going to study. When we develop that close relationship with God, he equips us for a purpose. But our impatience will cause us to misplace our obedience and ultimately pull away from his presence. We're going to dive into the story together. First, we're going to talk about God provides the ability for every assignment he gives us. Our second point we're going to cover is what is familiar is not always faithful. And then the third point we're going to cover is impatience reveals what we actually trust. That's what we're going to cover today. Before we get to the golden calf, I want you to see something beautiful that happens in Exodus chapter 31. Because this whole is where God reveals how he works with his people. Moses is on the mountain, and God is giving him detailed instructions about building the tabernacle and what needs to go in it. We talked a little bit about that last time. This is not just some regular tent, just some throw up from the weather. This is a place where God himself will dwell among his people. It's sacred, it's significant, and it requires incredible skill, woodwork, metalwork, embroidery, gemstone cutting, architectural design. And here's what God says in Exodus chapter 31 and 2. Let's read it together. See, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skill. Did you catch it? God just didn't give Bezalel a task to do. He didn't say, hey, this yours, good luck, figure it out. God filled him, equipped him, gave him his armor, his suit, his Iron Man armor, whatever you want to call it, with wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and skill. And then God does the same thing with Aholiab. He appoints him as Bezalel's partner and fills him with the exact same spirit and ability. God never calls people into relationships without also providing them what they need to serve him faithfully. God doesn't give you something, then abandon you for figure it out on your own. When God invites you to his presence, he's inviting you into a what? We talked about it over and over again. Relationship with him. He's also giving you something. He's also shaping you or trying to shape you and preparing you for what you actually need. Now, let me be clear about something, because this is where we get confused. This is where we don't really understand. So listen up. God's plan for your life may not be what you want to do. I'm going to say the same thing again. God's plan for your life may not be what you want to do. It might not be aligned with your 5-year plan. It might not make sense to your family, your friends, and yes, you have free will to choose something else. But here's what you need to understand. God's plan is not based on what you already good at. You see, we think God looks at our resume and things that we're good at and says, oh, you good at public speaking? Great, go do that. Oh, you're good at numbers? Oh, great, go be an accountant. That's not how God works. God looks at your heart and says, I'm going to use you for something that will require you to depend on me. And when you surrender to his way, he provides the talent, the skill, the wisdom, and the strength you need to get it done. Bezalel wasn't born knowing how to build a tabernacle, a tent of meeting, or Ark of the Covenant. But when God called him, he gave him the skills to do just that. Apostle Paul repeated this same principle in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10. For we are God's handiwork, created what? In Christ Jesus for what? Good works, which God prepared us. When did he prepare us? In advance for us to do. God already thought through that, just like he did Bezalel. You are God's workmanship. You are his masterpiece. He has already prepared good works for you to walk in. But here's the key. You have to stay in his presence and trust the process for him to be able to equip you with what you need to walk in there. Because when you stay close to God, you remain in his presence. He doesn't just save you for salvation. He shapes you. He doesn't just forgive you. He fills you up. He doesn't just call you because he has something for you. He equips you with the ability to be able to not only survive, but to thrive in his presence. That's the beauty of what God did to Bezalel. That's the beauty of what God wants to do with you. But now we have to turn the page, because God is equipping Bezalel over here, but down there in the mountain, below the clouds, down there separately, there's something else is going on. I want to do an exercise. Everybody close their eyes for a minute. Just humor me for a second. You ain't going to close it long. Close your eyes. Think of Jesus. Now open your eyes. What did you think of? What did you see when you went through that? You thought of Jesus, hopefully, like I asked you to, and close your eyes. That's probably the person you thought of, right? You thought of Jesus. That's who we see Jesus as. That's who I grew up and I saw Jesus as on every little thing I saw. But that's actually not what Jesus would potentially look like. We have been brainwashed unintentionally over the years in our thinking of who Jesus looks like. Now, just because he looks like, that doesn't change his power, that doesn't change his salvation, that doesn't change what he does for us, doesn't change none of that. But we have been unintentionally brainwashed in thinking who Jesus looked like. This is actually probably more close to what Jesus looked like. Not this, but this. This is probably more close. The Jewish people of that time was around 5'5". That's shorter than me. But that's probably similar. I took a few pictures because nobody knows exactly. But that's probably a few pictures with scriptures and everything and the bloodline of where he came from and archaeological backgrounds. So it's real easy, unintentionally, with good intentions, for us to be manipulated with our own understanding. It's not meant intentional. It just happens sometimes because we think we mean well. So how easy it is for you to be familiar with something that's probably not totally accurate. That leads us to our next point. What is familiar is not always faithful. I think I've changed too much. Let's read Exodus chapter 32 and 1. You can follow along on the slide. You don't have to turn. I'll make it easy for you. When the people saw Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and they said, "Come, make us gods who will be for us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." Let's pause right there. Moses had been gone for 40 days. The people were getting restless. He went past the cloud so they couldn't see him. They can't hear from God, and they became impatient. So they did something shocking. They asked Aaron to make them a god. Now, here's what's wild about that. These are the same people that stood at the base of the mountain in Mount Sinai and heard God's voice. These are the same people that saw God guide them by a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud in the daytime. These are the same people who watch food come down from heaven. Watch God perform all these things. But when they couldn't see Moses, when God's timing didn't match their expectations, they reverted back to what was familiar. And what was familiar? Egypt. As we know, the Israelites spent 400 years in Egypt. I've talked about that over and over again because I think it's a very important. They brainwashed. They were slaves. They knew slave thinking. They had to watch the Egyptians worship gods, their idols. They had seen the priests craft these images of these lowercase g's, as I call them. They knew how that system worked. That system was visible. They experienced it. It was tangible. It's something they will control. Aaron, create this for us. So when God seemed distant, when his timing felt too slow, when they went back to what they knew and what was familiar. And Aaron, who should have known better. And here's how we knew Aaron knew better, but didn't stop him. He went along with it. He collected the gold, melted it down, and fashioned a golden calf, right? And then he said, tomorrow we will have a festival for the Lord. He tried to make it look good for God. You might have caught that when you read that before. They didn't even think they were abandoning God. They thought they were worshiping him in just the way that made sense for them, in the way that felt comfortable for them, in a way that was familiar for them. Here's what I want you to get from that. Just because something feels normal or culturally acceptable doesn't mean it honors God. Let's bring that to our world for a second. How many of us get impatient with God? Everybody's hand should go up. And then what happens sometimes is we may try to return to our familiar patterns that are not faithful. Maybe it's the way you used to handle stress before you knew Jesus, but you want to go back to it. Maybe it's drugs. Maybe it's alcohol. Maybe it's binge watching just to numb out the world and not deal with your problems. Maybe it's doom scrolling, as I call it, on social media for hours and hours out, just avoiding life and avoiding your thoughts. Maybe it's the way you used to handle conflict, shutting people out, lashing out in anger, manipulating the situation just to get things your way. Maybe it's the way you used to make decisions, trusting your gut, leaning on your own understanding, doing what feels right instead of seeking God's wisdom. It's familiar, it's comfortable, it's what you know, but it's not faithful. Paul writes in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That simply means don't just go along just to get along. God wants us to stop the old patterns. He invites us into an intimacy of transformed obedience. It's an intimate connection. And that transformation doesn't happen when we're in control. It happens when we surrender to his presence, his timing, his way. The Israelites couldn't wait. They couldn't trust, so they went back to what was familiar. And it cost them dearly. 3,000 was slaughtered. Which brings us to the heart and our last final point for today. Impatience reveals what we trust. It's tough. What are you trying to control that frustrates you right now? Second Corinthians 5 and 7, for we walk by what? Faith, not by sight. Faith means trusting God even when you can't see him. Faith means believing God is working even when you can't see what he's doing. Faith means surrendering control even when everything you want to do is just grab it back. What are you trying to control right now? Because God's timing is frustrating you. Maybe it's a relationship. You've been praying reconciliation, but nothing's changed. You've been tempted to force conversations, manipulate the situation, or just give up entirely. Maybe it's a job. You've been asking God for direction, but doors aren't opening and don't stay open. You've been tempted to take the first offer that comes along, even though deep down you know this may not be the best for you because you need a couple of bucks. Maybe it's something you think God is calling you to do. You feel God stirring up in your spirit, as I say, something in your heart, but the path isn't just totally clear. You're so tempted to create your own plan, launch out on your own, or just settle for something safer. Here's what I've learned. Waiting seasons reveal whether we truly trust God or only trust results. The Israelites didn't trust God. They trusted what they could see. And when they couldn't see Moses, when they couldn't see God's plan unfolded, they panicked. And they feel like they needed to make a decision. Their impatience didn't just affect them, it pulled an entire nation into idolatry. When Moses finally came down from that mountain and saw what they had done, he was devastated. He took these tablets of law that was written by the fingers of God and destroyed them. And then they turned the dust, put it in the water, and he made them drink it. Now, to me, that was a little overkill, but he did do that. The people were out of control. God's presence, what was supposed to dwell among them, was in jeopardy. Moses had to ask God to lay down his life for these people who kept disobeying him over and over and over again. He still said, God, blot me out and save them. That's what Moses said. Do we have the power to sacrifice ourselves, to stand up for ourselves for waiting on God? All because they didn't trust. So let's bring this home real quick. I want you to think about your life right now. What are you waiting on? Everybody's waiting on something. Everybody in here, from 8 to 80, you're waiting on something. Maybe you're waiting on healing, physical, emotional, relational. And every day passes without change. Feels like God ain't listening. Maybe you're waiting on finances to improve. The bills are stacking up. The bank account is shrinking. And you're wondering if God really sees what you need or what you want. Maybe you're waiting on clarity. You've been asking God for direction, but the answer hasn't come. So you start to wonder if I just make a decision and hope for the best. Here's what you need to know. God's silence isn't God's absence. Just because you can't see what he's doing doesn't mean he's not doing something. Just because his timing doesn't match up with yours, you think he's forgotten about little old canary over here and his little problems. He don't have trust me anyway. I ain't worried about him. Remember, Bezalel, God was equipping him to give them a place for them to honor him, and they was down there being destructive. He was creating something beautiful, and they was over there being disobedient. He was equipping them with something to be in his presence, and they was doing whatever they was doing. Will you trust God in your waiting? Or will you be like the Israelites and just return with what's familiar and unfaithful? Let me give you 3 practical steps for takeaways today. First, identify your golden calf. What are you tempted to create, control, cling to when God seems silent? Identify it. Name it. Bring it to light in your thoughts. Second, and this I think is the most important one. I think it's even most important than the second one, in my opinion. Remember what God has already done in your life. How quickly we forget. God had just parted the Red Sea. They walked through on dry land. They had this big old, we talked about this. They had this big old song. I keep repeating this over and over again because it's just amazing. This big old song, they wrote them song, played harps and everything. 1, 2, 3. 3 days later, they was whining because they couldn't find no water. 3 days. 3 days they was whining. Now, you could say, well, Canoe was 40 this time, so maybe they, 3 days. The Israelites forgot the Red Sea. They forgot the food. They forgot God's faithfulness. Let's not make that same mistake. Write down ways God has showed up in your life and meditate on His goodness. Do that this week. Write it down. Make it tangible. So when you start forgetting, you can just, you're right, Lord, my fault. Put it on a sheet of paper. Third, choose to wait actively and not passively. I think we do try to do this. Waiting doesn't mean He's doing nothing. Sometimes we think that, but wait actively. Be more waiting actively in God's presence. Pray, read the word, worship, serve, help people, encourage somebody, stay connected to His people. God created the church for a reason, not for us to be out here on our own. It's easy to be on our own. Take it from me. I can just sit on the chair and be fine. In the office and be fine. But that's not what God created us to do. He created the church for a purpose, for us to connect to. When Aaron walked in to talk to God in the holiest of the holies, he wore armor, like I said last week, with the 12 stones of Israel. Not only did he represent himself talking to God, he represented the people talking to God. We are all connected through each other. Because the truth is, what God has for you, He will equip for you.